Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for another R Street America 250 event. I'm Ann Phelan, R Street Senior Director of Communications. Today's event is The President and the People, Affection, Authority, and Trust in the American Republic. We'll kick things off in here in just a moment, but we'll be covering the ways in which presidents have sought to connect with the public through speechwriting, the media, and polling. Before I hand it off to our moderator, I do want to take a brief moment to remind you all about R Street's America 250 project. As the US approaches this milestone, this is a rare opportunity for us to recenter American civic life around shared values, historical understanding, and democratic engagement. This is a moment to reaffirm the core principles of the American experiment: equality, self-government, federalism, and limited but effective government. These classically liberal principles are the cornerstones of our nation's founding, but they also underpin R Street's mission and our policy work today. For R Street, this anniversary is about more than a reflection. It's about renewing our commitment to liberty, pluralism, and the hard work of making our democratic culture stronger for the next 250 years. You can learn more about our project on our website, rstreet.org/America250. It's right there on the homepage. Should be easy to find. And you can watch previous A250 events on our YouTube page. We've covered all sorts of topics, including political violence and the history of the press and the media since the founding. Now, at this point, I'll turn it over to Jeff Vanderslice so we can get this conversation kicked off. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you so much, Anne, for that introduction. And thank you to all of you who are here today for joining us. As Anne mentioned, I'm Jeff Vanderslice, the Vice President of Policy Partnerships and Government Affairs at the R Street Institute. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by a distinguished panel who will lead us through what I hope will be a meaningful and thought-provoking discussion. Hans Nichols is a political reporter with Axios and co-author of Axios Hill Leaders, covering both the White House and national politics writ large, with former stints at NBC and Bloomberg News, among others. Also with us is Emily Sidner, who is an associate professor with Syracuse University Institute for Democracy, Journalism, and Citizenship, and author of the book Disrespectful Democracy: The Psychology of Political Incivility. Craig Shirley is a presidential advisor, historian, and former political operative who has written several books on the life and presidency of Ronald Reagan, including Rendezvous with Destiny, Reagan Rising, and Reagan's Revolution, as well as a book looking at a much earlier period of American history titled Mary Ball Washington: The Untold Story of George Washington's Mother. And last but certainly not least is Clark Judge, who is a former speechwriter and advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, as well as founder and managing director of the White House Writers Group. So welcome to you all, and thank you very much for joining us. Clark, I'd like to direct this first question toward you, just starting with the moment we find ourselves in. It's very convenient that we're only 2 days removed from the President's State of the Union address to Congress, providing us a sort of natural jumping off point for this discussion. My question is, how... Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. The State of the Union, of course, is an annual tradition that in its modern form dates back to the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, prior to which written messages to Congress were the norm for much of our history. So my first question is, at its core today, what purpose does the speech serve? Is it a constitutional obligation, an agenda-setting opportunity, public persuasion tool, or something else in your mind?
Well, it's all of that and more. Typical answer to this kind of question is to start off with the passage in the Constitution that says that calls for the State of the Union address. Typically, you hear people say, "Well, then it it's Article 2, Section 3, and it leads with that. And typically, you hear people say, "Yeah, but then it didn't get went off the tracks." I disagree with that. The Section 3 of the Article 2 is about the interaction of the presidency and the Congress as a whole, not the Senate, not a particular veto, but as a whole. Involves uh, uh, getting the president making proposals about him resolving impasses on between the houses of Congress and receiving uh, diplomats, which is in a sense the president for Congress and the presidency. So it's about the combination of these. And we certainly saw the other day Congress and the president interacting in the State of the Union address. Maybe a little more than usual, but in a way that very much drew out the differences among them, different parts of the Congress and the agenda of the presidency. And uh, what we tend to do is get very focused on television. These are televised. But we shouldn't forget that Tocqueville said that wrote about the American and his newspaper. Every place you went, you'd find Americans with newspapers. Americans have been consumers of the mass media from the start because that's so much a part of being a republic that we are all, whether it's through watching television or reading a newspaper or standing up in the middle of a meeting and having a speech, much like Norman Rockwell with the famous painting of him that he had of the town meeting in New Hampshire. This is the enduring quality of the American Republic. And what we saw the other night may have been a bit contentious at times and funny at times and touching at times, but it was very much within our tradition.
Yeah, that's great. Of course, talking a little bit more about the what Anne mentioned, the title of today's event, the president and the people,
Mhm.
affection, authority, and trust in the American Republic. I'm going to ask from a speechwriting perspective, what characteristics of a State of the Union have the potential to build those attributes of affection and of authority or of trust, and what, to the contrary, might risk eroding them?
Well, look, we are a contentious republic. We have been a contentious republic from the first. Only George Washington was elected unanimously. And you have Lincoln's first and very great statement to Congress, in which he, on the eve of the Civil War, that was a contentious period. We have FDR the New Deal was a very contentious period. We tend to forget about that. The other night was a contentious a meeting of a lot of support for the president. But actually, I would say what the president did quite brilliantly the other night was he let the Democrats define themselves, and that is part of the vigor of a democracy, of a republic. The other side defined themselves. He defined himself. How did it go for him? Two-thirds the polling afterwards were two-thirds approval from of the president. You looked at the pulse polls, and Republicans liked it a lot, and independents didn't liked it too, but not quite as much as Republicans. Democrats didn't like it much at all, and yet that's the nature of our time. It brought that out. The worst thing in a republic is to suppress the expression of concern of belief and to the thing that makes a republic strong is that those come out. There's vigorous debate. The people observe and ultimately decide. Right now, the president is underwater in polling. That's probably because the economy, though he was right about his statement about it in terms of the data, his policies have just been really just took form action on January 1st. It takes about 6 months or so for a policy to be felt by the public at large. So he was trying to, in essence, he was saying, wait and see, because you'll find something. We'll see whether that's the case. But that is the nature of a republic. We have these debates, and it is that kind of debate, even when it's as crude as some of the Democrats have been. I, even then, that is what strengthens us, that makes us affection, authority, trust. The trust is founded on that kind of process. The affection is founded in each side on the part of the debate, and the authority is the authority of the American people, and it's expressed as it was the other night.
That's helpful. Craig, I'd like to bring you into the discussion, particularly with you sort of wearing your hat as a historian. If we step back in time to the early republic of Washington and his early successors, how did they understand the relationship between public affection and constitutional authority?
They understand it acutely when they're in 1776 and in 1781 in Philadelphia, there in Philadelphia, is that they understood that this was not a revolution of the elites. It was they had to have the support of the American people, and they did, not entirely. You know, historians estimate that maybe 30% of American colonists were opposed to the revolution, and as a matter of fact, after the revolution, some 100,000 American colonists left America because they did not want to live under American rule. They preferred British rule. But you know, if you go to 1781, is that the communication was important. Now, understand that they hated at the time they hated the pamphleteers and the broadsheets. They were rough. They were filled with half truths and slurs. But they understood that the media of the time, the broadsheets and the pamphleteers of the time, were valuable allies of the American people against their government. And that's they wanted the power to be with the American people, and that's why they put, it's kind of oddly jammed in the First Amendment. They're all personal rights, right? Right of assembly, right of speech, right of religion, and so on. But oddly jammed in the First Amendment is also freedom of the press, because they believed in the importance of the freedom of the press. That to Clark's point about the division of America, I think that's so important, and that goes to what happened 2 nights ago, is that we talk about, we hear this fallacy about American unity. We have never been unified as a country. We've never been unified as a country. Is that we were divided in the Revolutionary War, we were divided in the War of 1812. The Civil War was about our very divisions. World War I, Congress took 3 weeks to approve Wilson's war resolution, and then some 36 Republican congressmen voted against it. The only 2 times in America we've been divided over the environment, we've been divided over race relations, we've been divided over all manner of issues. The only 2 times in the history of the United States where we were truly united, was starting December 7th, 1941, and we were united until the off-year elections in 1942, when Republican congressmen were criticizing FDR's stewardship of the war. They said he wasn't moving quickly enough. So it broke out into partisan division again. And then for a couple of months after September 11th. But that didn't last either. So the division is probably, and then we saw it the other night, the very divisions between the two parties right now, is that there's no overlap anymore. There used to be liberal Republicans and there used to be conservative Democrats, but the two parties have become so polarized is that they don't agree on anything. They don't agree on which ice cream they like. Is and the great telltale for me on the divisions is the one issue that the two parties were united on since 1948, right up until a couple years ago, was Israel. Both parties were strongly in support of aid to Israel, defense of Israel. That's no longer the case. The Republican Party has become, partially because of Donald Trump, and partially because of the party itself, has become a staunch defender of Israel. And the Democratic Party is withdrawn from that. And you saw that manifest itself in the election last year when Kamala Harris wouldn't pick the governor of Pennsylvania because he was Jewish and he might offend some Arab voters inside the Democratic Party. So the parties now they don't agree on anything. Is that it resembles more a parliamentary system, and the only way you get things done in this country is you have to have one party or another has to have total control of the Congress, of the courts, and that's the only way you get things done in this country.
Tracing the evolution of the president's direct communication with the public, and Clark touched on this very briefly. But for you, Craig, how did the presidency itself change as an institution as presidents began speaking more directly to the public, from going back to written messages, eventually
Sure.
to radio, to television, and now digital platforms?
Well, the old line, nature abhors a vacuum, and nature also abhors static power. Is that once power is acquired, the desire to acquire more power is part of the mandate. Is that, and then it becomes a belief system, right? Uh, is that they must be right because they're powerful. The New York Yankees must be right all the time, and they must be very, very good and honorable because they win all the time. Is that, and that happens with all institutions. I don't care whether it's the IRS. I don't care if it's the I don't care if it's the Congress. I don't care. Is that power cannot be destroyed or created. It can only be moved around. And power has steadily been moving for the last 250 years from the American people toward the what I call the bubble elites in Washington. Is that in the form of regulation, in form of taxation, power has been, and there's always an ongoing battle between our street's view of the world, where power decides, and Brookings Institute, and where they think power decides belongs. So that is the ongoing struggle. In a way, it wanes and ebbs all the time.
I'd like to.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, about the president. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's
You
fine.
know, no, I'm sorry, but I gone off on a tangent. Is that, as Clark said, is that the Constitution prescribes for a State of the Union. Of course, when Washington and Adams delivered them in person, the State of the Union speeches, they weren't called State of the Union. They were just called an address to Congress. And then for over 100 years, is that no president delivered a State of the Union, not Lincoln, not Millard Fillmore, not any of them. And the practice was only revived by Woodrow Wilson, and now has become a staple of Washington. It really, Clark is the word master, but I think he would agree with me is that the State of the Unions do not usually produce great history. If you want great history, go to convention speeches, go to inaugural addresses, the New Frontier, or farewell addresses. Those really set policy for America. Is that this is a show. It's a fun show. It's a partisan show. Next year they'll probably be throwing tomatoes at each other. But it doesn't really produce. All it is really is a restatement of where both parties are.
Yeah, if I could just add one thing to that.
Of course.
Our State of the Union addresses have tended to be setting the themes, particularly in election year,
Yes.
for the administration in power. Basic themes: America is back. We heard this. We heard that from Reagan in before the 84 campaign. These are setting up themes that you'll then play throughout the year.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, that's very helpful, and I'll definitely pull you both back into the conversation a little bit later on that point in particular, because we do want to talk a little bit about agenda setting as well. Emily, I'd like to ask you to come into the conversation at this point and talk a little bit about the relationship of polling to presidential communication and the media, so that we can paint a fuller picture of the sort of modern feedback loop. How should modern presidents, in your mind, think about public opinion polling? Is polling, in your view, a leadership tool, or does it risk potentially turning presidents into followers rather than shapers of opinion?
Thanks so much, Jeff, for the question. And I think actually we want to think about it in the context of what you just asked, Craig, right? In this new sort of media environment where communication scholars call it now the ubiquitous presidency, that the president is sort of maintaining near constant, right, highly visible personal presence through social media and other media platforms. Polling is one tool that he can use to um, be a sort of constant presence in people's minds. And so if we think about polling as sort of one branch of the way that a president might assess what the people are thinking, it's both a sort of leadership tool that can shape opinion and one that you hope that a president who is being responsive to the people is working with, right? So we might think about both the ways that we know presidents are attuned to what polls are saying. We know, for example, that Trump pays attention to the approval ratings that he has through polls like Gallup, although then we can have a whole separate conversation, of course, about the fact that Gallup recently announced it's not going to continue to ask its presidential approval rating questions. But right, so it's clear that they are listened to, and to some extent, presidents are responsive to what polls are telling them. We can also think about which polls they are being responsive to. There are obviously some gold standard, really high quality polls that are out there trying to capture the full swath of the American people. There are also ones that are done on smaller samples, more specific samples that, honestly, if you are the leader of a major party, you're trying to engage with a particular subsection of the public might actually be more useful for you, right? Getting a sense of what the median voter thinks when you're trying to build a coalition of a particular set of groups is actually not as helpful as we might initially think. The other piece of the equation that you asked about was the extent to which presidents are sort of shaping the opinions themselves. And we can also see this in how polls work, right? That you can pick a poll that's out there, particularly one that's in a sort of more responsive political moment. You see that they are asking questions in response to things that the president has said or done, right? So we will see polling. I mean, we saw polling already about, I think Clark mentioned actually some of it, about people's responses to the State of the Union, to the proposals and events of the night. And by engaging in particular behaviors, drawing attention to certain forms of communication, the president is also shaping polling and the things that people are thinking about and the ways that they're responding to those surveys.
That's really helpful, and I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I think you've touched on the fact that communication is a two-way street, right? It's not just about the president talking to the people. It's also a reality that people want to feel heard, right? And so my next sort of a follow-up question is, in an age of polarization and echo chambers, how does or should a president actually listen to the public and get a sense of public sentiment? polling is one tool you mentioned. Are there others that they should be paying attention to, without being overwhelmed by the loudest, maybe sometimes most extreme voices in the room? And that's for you as well, Emily.
I think there are some obvious approaches that are being used, whether or not those are the ones that should be. I think we can collectively have a conversation about. So obviously, the presidents since Obama have used social media pretty consistently to try to gauge the interest of a particular subset of people who are present and engaged on social media. I have some concerns that the people, I mean, certainly I have concerns that the people on social media are not representative of the American public, but we have concerns that people who are responding to even the best surveys out there might not be as representative of the American public as we might like. And so, I think it might be time to get creative, right? We're thinking about what does the presidency look like in the next not even 250 years, but certainly after this. And if communication has gotten this easy, surely there are some ways to connect with right, the average American who is not on X or Truth Social or even Facebook in a meaningful way that helps you understand a bit more about what their concerns are.
Absolutely. That's very helpful. Hans, bringing you into the conversation now, many of us, and particularly those of us who have studied political science, have been taught that the media shapes, in large part, what we think about, right? What is on the agenda? What is being discussed, sort of writ large? In today's fragmented media landscape, is that still the case? Who actually sets the agenda today? Is it the press, the president, partisan outlets, social media? Who is it?
Yeah, it's a lot less true. I don't know who it is. It's just kind of like the Borg, the blob that kind of like just we're all sort of surfing a wave every day. That's especially true in the Trump administration. I would say most reporting is reactive right now. I mean, you can create your own vortex as a reporter to say, this is the story I want to focus on. And if it picks up, everyone will match it. But it seems as though, unless you're being very sort of aggressive in agenda setting as a reporter, which is, well, the goal most mornings, um, there's no one place where we get our marching orders from. I would say, I would say the one thing that's like, so the algorithm has changed a little bit. So I'll just give you an example. There's something that most news organizations use called data miner, which basically scrubs Twitter for tweets or bits of news that are taking off and are going to be viral. And I don't hold me to this, but I think it was founded by some former Bloomberg guys. I used to be at Bloomberg. And at Bloomberg, we had something called a read spike. So if you had a story that said, let's do a Bush administration story. President George W. Bush is to take a ownership in General Motors for $5 billion. Okay, big story. Government nationalizing GM. That would have instantly on the Bloomberg terminal generated a read spike, which is to say a bunch of traders would have instantly read that. We would have gotten the feedback quickly. And then we'd get that was the healthy feedback loop between reporters and readers on what your readers wanted to read about. Data miner works similarly in that if something is very hot and sometimes prescient, it will let us know very quickly. And so the worst is when someone tweets something in a hallway, it gets data minered, and then your editors are like, why don't we have this, right? And I'll just give you an example of where data miner has been pretty fast. You guys probably all remember the terrorist who drove a truck into the Christmas markets in Berlin. That was data miner that first had that, and I was in DC at the time. I'd been based in Berlin, but a data miner came off that as probably just someone on the side of the street tweeting something like that and saying, truck crashes into Christmas market. Would have been written in German. It gets translated, and I saw that instantly. And you can kind of verify these things pretty quickly. And so that was my assignment editor, and I just headed home, got my passport, and got the next flight to Berlin. So it's more diffuse now. The days of like when Clark was in the White House, of like the Times sets the agenda in the morning, and then the Post, and then the the networks follow, that's over. I mean, they're like 18 news cycles in a given day, and that's a slow day. So yeah, it's just every day we're just drinking from a fire hose.
And do you see that continuing in perpetuity until we reach a new normal, or where
No.
do you see it sort of
Yes,
settling?
yeah, yes, no. I mean, there'll be a fair amount of fatigue, both among reporters and the public. Like, you can't always be drinking from a fire hose. You kind of see this as Um, I always feel like after a big natural disaster story, the media doesn't really know it, but they're still jonesing for like a big story. So like, there's some like major hurricane that comes through, and everyone's focused on the news, and then the cables kind of wind down because they're back to like a car chase or something like that. Um, you can't talk about news cycles without talking about President Trump and his ability to kind of create news cycles and just drive a lot of news, and he's very accessible. Right. I mean, we talk to him on any given days. Reporters, I'm not at the White House most days, as you see. I'm in the Capitol, but he just drives an incredible amount of news. Now, that wasn't the case with Biden, right? There's times when we didn't see Biden for, you know, too long, I'll say. And Biden didn't drive nearly as much news. But yeah, Trump knows how to produce, and he knows, as we saw at the State of the Union, he knows how to drive news, and he knows how to engage with reporters, and it's a major part of his presidency. So I suspect it slows down in a post-Trump world.
Right. That's helpful and a perfect segue actually to my next question. Can you talk a little bit about the current relationship between the presidency as an institution and the press? Is it, in your mind, adversarial? Is it symbiotic, performative?
Yeah, no, I mean, if on the spectrum of adversarial to I mean, adversarial and performative can sometimes be the same like spectrum. Like, look at Sam Donaldson, right? That was performative, but that was also adversarial, just barking at Reagan. Jim Acosta kind of did something similar with Trump. I mean, there have been a million examples. Uh, it's probably as adversarial as it's been in the last four presidents. So, like, it's probably more adversarial in this president and Trump 2.0 than Trump 1.0. But there's always like tension, right? It's just a little bit more public. Like other White Houses have tried to ice out reporters, have tried to freeze out reporters, have like, been nasty to reporters. Trump just does it on live television. And he, I mean, it's at a higher level. I don't want to diminish or sort of like just sweep under the rug some of the things, the personal attacks, et cetera, which we've all seen. But like, it's just kind of more out in the open with Trump. But they still engage. Like, they're still like, if you have a story, you go to the White House, you ask them about it. They say, you need a little more context with that. Here's where you're wrong on that, or you're going to get played on that. I mean, it's not they do blow you up on Twitter if they don't like a story, and they do keep tabs. Like my buddy slash colleague Mark Caputo has his name on the official White House website for being kind of non-compliant, right? That's new. Kind of a parade of terribles as the White House sees it. Like that, I don't, I'm sure that somewhere in the Obama White House they had reporters that they didn't like, and they talked about it candidly and acidly, but they didn't put that up for the public to see. That seems like a material difference, but I don't know.
Yeah, Jeff, may I jump in here, please?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to say to Hans's point, the system was designed to be adversarial.
Yeah.
Is that they wanted the press to hold government accountable, and it worked pretty much for the last 250 years. If you think about it, a little bit too extreme. So John Adams imprisoned newspaper editors who displeased him. That was a little bit. I mean, maybe you like that, maybe you don't. Abraham Lincoln imprisoned newspaper editors who displeased him, who were critical of his Civil War policies. Is that FDR? I mean, Woodrow Wilson. There was an act, Espionage Act, that was aimed at newspapers. FDR regulated media. He put out memos. I came across when I was working my book on 1941, is that there were memos sent to radio stations all across America saying during the war what you can broadcast and what you can't broadcast. You can't broadcast troop movements. You can't broadcast names of soldiers and sailors. I mean, there was a lot of hostility there between radio and the FDR administration. And then, of course, John Kennedy actually canceled the subscription, the White House subscription to the New York Herald Tribune because he disagreed with the Republican editorial policy. And for years, we've had media that indicated their preference, whether it was the Springfield Republican or the Rochester Democrat, they indicated their political preferences just by the very title of the newspaper. So we've had adversarial and partisan press for the last 250 years, and I would say it's probably healthy for the system. It made Nixon uncomfortable with the Watergate paper, with the Pentagon Papers, and during Watergate, but it was still healthy for the system, for the truth to get out to the American people.
Emily, at this point, I'd like to bring you back into the discussion because much of your research, as I understand it, focuses on incivility in the media. In your mind, and Hans, please feel free to chip in here too. Does media coverage still persuade people, or does it mostly reinforce what they already believe?
I think it depends on which people we're talking about, right? So we can think about, obviously, sort of segmenting the American people into Republicans and independents and Democrats, but we can also think about who are the people that are paying the most attention to politics, the ones that are really interested, really engaged, and then what is the section of America that's like, yeah, politics is a thing that is important, and I'm going to go vote, but right, I'm unlikely to potentially attend this webinar or engage in a lot of intense attention to the news or sort of broader political narratives. And for that first group, the really invested people that are all here, right? Probably the media is not going to do much in terms of persuasion. That our attitudes are pretty entrenched. We're unlikely to be using the news as a vehicle for attitude change as opposed to sort of information gathering. For others who are not paying as much attention, the ability to persuade gets a little bit broader, right? Because you don't have a set of attitudes that you're locked into already, and you're more open to a variety of perspectives. The question then becomes, right, where are people getting their news? What kind of news is it? And, as Craig pointed out, we've had a wide range of partisan and sort of objective papers, et cetera, for the history of the United States. But if you're consistently tuning into one of those more partisan perspectives, persuasion is going to look a little different than if you are tuning into the sort of more traditional objective journalism.
That's great. Hans, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, look, does media biases media like tip voters? I like it's no one knows, right? I mean, on the margins, I tend to think yes, but like I could never really prove it, and no one can ever have because we never do double blind experiments. Like, was the press corps maybe like a little bit more sympathetic towards Obama than towards McCain? Kind of seems that way, right? I can never prove it, but kind of seems that way. Would McCain have lost anyway? Probably. I don't know. I think in a way, to me, it's more interesting in primaries because there you filter through sort of the you can at least uh, isolate one partisan cohort. So I think I would love to see a really good study of like uh, whether or not the press corps was more pro Obama than Hillary, and you had so many different sample sets there between all the different remember Meet Me in Ohio. There's North Carolina. There was obviously New Hampshire and Iowa, but like you had a lot of different data there. So but again, like I mean, if you're a reporter and you're doing your job well, you're talking to people on both campaigns, and they are constantly trying to work you and saying, work the refs and saying that that was a biased piece and you're in the tank for so and so, et cetera, et cetera. So it's basic. I mean, everyone's going to choose their own adventure on this and say that the media is biased one way or the other. And it's my joke on this is kind of like the quip about the weather. Everyone talks about it, but no one does anything about it. So that may be unsatisfactory to people who think that the media is hopelessly partisan and in favor of one party versus the other. And it's usually the criticism is usually that that there's a bias towards Democrats. There are other ways around it. Obviously, Twitter's leveling things. I mentioned that earlier. Social media is leveling things. Like if some video takes off on TikTok and it's content and it has news, like, that will get voted on basically by whether or not people agree with the message and think it's clever. And so, if anything, the check on sort of traditional reporting is social media. And just in your guys' own lives, like if something ever really kind of bad happens, you really want information, like, social media is pretty fast. Like, I don't want to envision any bad stories for you guys, but just think of like the Venezuela snatch and grab. The social media conversation was much faster and further ahead than anything. Print can kind of keep up because print can verify. Hard for TV to verify. I mean, print, like, a lot of times on cable, you're just kind of talking about what's on Twitter. And I've spent a lot of time doing cable TV hits, right? And you're just kind of like but if you really want to know information, let's take it out of politics. You want to know if your grandson's, basketball team won. Like, social media is going to be, and you want to see a shot of your grandson, making the winning shot. Social media and text messages are going to be a lot faster than any metropolitan sports section. It's fast. It's good. It's exciting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. In just a moment, for those who are listening in, we're going to turn to questions from you all from the audience. So if you have something in mind that you'd like to ask that we haven't covered, or if there's a follow-up question to any of my questions that you wish I would have asked, please go ahead and drop them into the function in the Zoom session we have here. I know we already have a couple of questions that I hope to get to momentarily, but just wanted to put everyone on notice and invite folks to do that. My last question before we turn to the audience is that a quote from Abraham Lincoln that has always stuck with me is one in which he was cited as saying, "With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing nothing can succeed. Consequently, he who molds public sentiment goes deeper than he who enacts statutes or pronounces judicial decisions," end quote. And so, Clark, and really for any of you who care to chime in after Clark, is that still true in your mind, or maybe put differently, can a president govern effectively without being broadly liked?
My feeling is that this Lincoln had it a little bit upside down in this sense. The way that you don't exactly mold public opinion. What you say either comports with what people's experience is and what their belief is, or it does not. And if it does not, then you're in an uphill battle. If it does, you have great strength in what you're saying. Lincoln had, I'm something of a student of Lincoln's rhetoric. And he said at one point that he had been very influenced by Euclid's geometry. Well, what's in Euclid's geometry? Axiom, theorem, result. What is Lincoln's axiom? Again and again, it is the commonly held views of the American people as expressed in the Declaration of Independence, whether it's his first address to Congress, whether it's the Gettysburg Address. He's constantly grounding everything he has in that broadly embraced statement. And everything he then says goes from that. If your axioms are right, if your axioms reflect the experience and the beliefs of the people, you're in a tremendously powerful position. They do not, if they're at odds with that experience and belief of the people, then you're going to go nowhere. By linking everything he did to that initial foundation, those axioms, he changed the nation. He saved the nation. But if he had done it without that understanding, he would have been nowhere.
That's great. Anybody have anything to add?
You know who liked that quote a lot was Rahm Emanuel. Rahm certainly believed in it. So I mean, like that was just sort of, I remember early Obama. Rahm obviously has gone on to other things, and I think we can safely say is going on to a presidential campaign himself. I don't know. Maybe he seems he's making all the moves of someone who would be running for president. But yeah, that was his theory early Obama. You know, which he would like, and you know, they went through some tough debates there, right? They did healthcare first, and then did Dodd-Frank. But you know, we can argue on whether or not they got there on Obamacare. I mean, they didn't really. They didn't do everything they wanted to do, in part because they lost 60 votes in the Senate when was it Scott Brown who surprised Martha Coakley, and then suddenly the whole process stopped. I didn't think I'd be excavating Obamacare 2009 legislative policy, but stay with me. Whole policy stopped, and then whatever the Senate was out of the Senate, the House had to eat. So the House could no longer fix. Nancy could no longer fix what's going to be the Senate. But like, sure, I think presidents believe that, but I don't know. Craig and Clark would know better than me on that.
I
They've
would
written
say that
speeches.
Obama lost his message. He lost that link to the axioms of the American people. He his speech to the Democratic convention, in which he talked about not a red America, blue
Oh
America.
four, the oh 04 one, yeah, in Boston.
Yeah, that's right. That exactly fit the
Brilliant.
axioms
Brilliant
of the
speech.
American people.
Yeah.
He got into office and he lost it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's
but
his problem. That was his problem.
yeah, but one re-election got Supreme Court justices
Well, he
confirmed.
won re-election against a very, very weak opponent. I mean, a guy
Banking
who
crisis.
has, I think we're getting feedback someplace, but a guy who had this magnificent get out the vote thing that was his beta test was election day. I mean, that was an inept campaign, and that's why the Republicans were so angry at him afterwards.
There was
But
also
so
uh,
comparatively, Obama was closer than Romney was, but it wasn't the case the next time around uh, with um, with Trump and Clinton. Trump was closer, much
Clark,
closer.
may jump in here. There was also a huge, awful banking crisis on Wall Street in that election, which really hurt McCain. McCain didn't handle the issue very well at all, and Obama was the beneficiary of that. But to just your point about Obama's organization, I witnessed it personally because at the time, one of our sons was going to Emerson College and in Boston, and Obama didn't need help in Massachusetts. He was going to carry it anyway. But they had my son and 6 college roommates came to Virginia and stayed with us for a week while they did door-to-door canvassing for the Obama campaign. I mean, that was really, I mean, it speaks to how well organized their get out the vote effort was.
Did you report your in-kind contribution? Hosting those six hungry kids.
I'll tell you, no, it wasn't 600, it was 6 kids. But I'll
Six
tell you
hungry.
I'll tell you what was interesting is I remember one Sunday morning, my wife was cooking eggs and pancakes for the kids, and one of them says, "Mr. Shirley, I don't understand is that how can you be so nice and be a conservative?"
We've had a number of questions roll in from the audience, so I'd like to tackle at least a few of them, as many as we can. Picking in no particular order, one of the attendees writes, "As you mentioned, our republic has always been contentious. How do we keep people from checking out and encourage them to stay involved when divisions and conflicts are so publicized?" And it wasn't addressed to anyone in particular, so anyone who wants to take that would be welcome.
I would say you don't. I would say you don't. You don't. That is a vote. People not participating is a vote. People checking out is a vote. There's nothing to compel them or to make them. I mean, that would be a different form of government to make them participate. But that's what our system allows, is for people to not be involved. We go through an election every 2 years where half the country doesn't even vote. I mean, how do you compel them to vote? I mean, you're running into all sorts of constitutional problems that way.
That's right.
Emily,
we can,
yep.
yeah, I think we can both recognize that abstention is a form of expression and sort of look at what has become effective, both in the context of right, sort of campaign effects, but also just, what we can do as individuals who do find this interesting and care about the future of American government and democracy. And one of the things that we know from social science, double-blind experiments, like Hans was mentioning earlier, is that social pressure is actually a pretty powerful strategy. That people who are, reminded by their friends and family, etc., that an election is happening, that know that they have a space that they can talk about the issues and the candidates, that's a sort of non-judgmental space, right, where they can ask questions about things they're not sure about, or where they can learn more, can actually go a long way towards getting them involved in ways that are suitable for them, right? You don't have to say, you need to come out and vote, you need to vote for this candidate, you need to be protesting every day. You can just be someone who says, hey, right, I think all of this is really interesting. Do you want to come with me to a town meeting or the school board conversation, or whatever it is that you choose to participate in? And that's one of the ways that lots of people get drawn into more political engagement on their own.
If I could say something on this, there is some data along these lines. Um, the longer you've lived in a place, the more likely you are to be voting and engaged. The higher your level of education, the more likely you are to vote and be engaged. The higher your income is, same thing. The stronger your family structure. The thing that's driving, the older you are, the more likely you are. What this amounts to is the more you are engaged in a community, the more likely you are to be politically active and engaged. The uh, what we do have is large segments of the population that are highly mobile, that they are not particularly tied to communities. They tend to be more reachable through basically extreme ideology because they have nothing in terms of the social structure they're in to engage them. And then they end up in groups that are kind of weird, which is a characteristic of our current time. I would say the more people are part of their community, the more they will do all the things that are common. And those who aren't are either go very radical or drop out.
That's very helpful. I appreciate that. I'm going to go to a question that was asked fairly early on in our conversation, so it may feel a little bit disjointed from the rest of this, but I think the audience member provides enough context to sort of bring us back to that part of the conversation, and it's addressed to Craig. They say, your comment reminds me of Davis, Frost, and Cohen's book, The Partisan Divide, Congress in Crisis. While there is a great deal of reform needed, I think, where are you these days on voting reform? I feel proportional representation would break party monopoly in Congress, and a consensus mapping voting system for the presidency would realign incentives for voting and governance back toward coalitions, issue-driven legislation, and cohesive good governance. Any thoughts you care to share there?
Whoosh. You run into all sorts of constitutional issues when you go to proportional representation. Is that the they're very specific about by population, by state, is that I don't. Plus, it would lead to all sorts of accusations. I remember I wear many different hats, as Clark knows, and one of them is I own a public affairs and public relations company. And back in 1999, I'm dating myself now, but I read a small article in the Washington Post how the Clinton administration was planning on using census sampling instead of enumeration to do the next census to figure out apportionment of members of Congress. And I immediately recognized that this was going to lead to all sorts of problems, because it only takes a few people to figure out how to give Texas one congressman and give New York State 100 congressmen. And so one of our clients at the time was Southeastern Legal Foundation, and I went to them. I said, "This deserves litigation. The whole issue of sampling versus enumeration." And they agreed, and they filed suit in a three-judge panel down in Southern Virginia, and immediately it won 3-0. And then the Clinton administration appealed, and it went to the Supreme Court, and there, in a 5-4 decision, they ruled that it was the census had to be taken by enumeration and not sampling, because of the problems it would lead to, including the potential for corruption. It was look up the case. It was Glavin versus Clinton. It was very important Supreme Court decision, a very historic Supreme Court decision. But they affirmed basically what the founding fathers had said, 250 years earlier, that this should be done. I mean, they didn't do sampling, obviously, in 1781, but they did. But that you do this by enumeration, and that seems to be really the only system that works, the one that leads to the cleanest elections, and the one that has the least amount of potential for corruption.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, simplicity is extremely important in
Yes,
elections.
yes, yes,
You have a lot of passion, you have a lot of resources and ambition colliding with one another. Anything that starts to get to, oh, a little shade of judgment here and a little shade of judgment there will be latched on and become a vehicle for fraud and corruption. It's, and will instinctively be rejected by the public for legitimacy in outcomes, because there'll be a sense of somebody was playing with things. You need simplicity, directness, one ballot in a box, traceable in case somebody looks as though they've been fooling around with things. It is essential to the trust in elections.
Emily, Hans, do you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation on this point? Okay, no, that's quite all right, and very helpful. We at the R Street Institute have done quite a lot on elections policy and even looking at things like proportional representation. So we'll be sure to share that with all of the viewers afterwards, and give folks a chance to do a bit of a deeper dive on this moving forward. I guess the last audience question before I take sort of moderator's prerogative to ask the final question. One of our audience members asked about 15 minutes ago when we were talking about how presidents and politicians, I think, writ large, should respond to public sentiment. This individual's question is, what if, quote, the people are going in multiple directions? Maybe put differently, what if it's hard to discern a single, public sentiment?
People are always going in multiple directions. Hey, wake up. And that's why we have debate. That's why we have discussion. Well, that's why we have people calling one another by names. It's always that way. And the task of anybody in seeking to leadership in a republic is to embrace that and to, in one way or another, present some or craft or whatever that pulls people together, enough people to win. And then afterwards, there'll be a lot of people who say, "Oh, you guys are stinking," and I'm walking out and whatever. But that's the nature of it. We're dealing with people.
To Clark's point, I'll just add in real quickly, Jeff. Is many years ago, I was working for a Senate candidate in Massachusetts named Avi Nelson. And Avi told me a story one time. Clark's nodding his head. He remembers Avi. He was a great guy. He lost, unfortunately, but he used to have a radio talk show in Boston on WRKO. And he told me one time this funny story. He had the morning drive, and he was doing his shtick, and a caller calls in and says, I'm sick of politics. We need a senator who's for cutting taxes. We need a senator who's for less government. We need a senator who's pro-life. And we need a senator for strong defense. And that's why I'm voting for Ted Kennedy for the Senate this year.
Yeah. Clarity also is helpful.
Yes.
Anyone else? Yeah, go
Yeah, I
ahead.
think if I can jump in from a slightly different direction, right? So the people on the webinar maybe are going in different directions also. Right, this is also part of why the president isn't the only person making decisions in government, right? That it can be difficult with a unitary executive to say, okay, here's what everyone in the United States, this massive democratic country, thinks, and how do I translate that into a single policy? But if you look at the legislature, right, there's a reason that we have so many more people in the legislature that are right in the House in particular are responsible for much smaller districts, with the hope that, or the assumption in some cases, that people in those smaller geographic spaces are going to think more in a similar direction and therefore can be sort of amalgamated up into a legislative debate, as Clark just mentioned earlier, where all of those different perspectives and policy options are evaluated and engaged, and in sort of an ideal world, the best ones will rise to the top and become policy. And of course, we know that's not exactly how government works in practice, but I think one way to think about the sort of solution to a population that's going in a lot of different directions is to say, okay, where are the places where conversation and connection can happen at the smallest level? And for the US government, that's in House members' offices.
And that's also why you have compromise and why there's a story of a road that was to be built in Massachusetts between Boston and I think Plymouth. And it was supposed to be a very fast road to get from one to the other. There wasn't one at the time. By the time the road was built, it was, I think, a 40-mile road, 40-mile distance had become a 100-mile road. And the reason was this town over here wanted the road to come, and this town over there wanted him to stop there, and this town. And what was that? That was compromise. Was it ideal by a Euclidean standard? No, but it was one that satisfied the needs of the people and was achieved. The result was achieved through compromise and through a little here and a little there. People don't like that sometimes. It isn't elegant, but it's part of our process, and appropriately so.
Yes.
Yeah, and I appreciate that sentiment, and Emily, to your point that perhaps compromise and that sort of sausage making process isn't always what we actually get, but it's nice to remind ourselves that that's what we're supposed to have, right? And strive for it, certainly. So the last question, and really just tying all of this back into the larger sort of backdrop of this event with the various America 250 events that we've been doing here at R Street. My final question is and this is for each of you, what kind of presidential communication will be required in the next, pick your time horizon, I'm imagining 20 to 25 years, to sustain trust? What do you think will be required? What do you think we should hope to see? And I'm happy to go in with in any direction you want. Maybe Clark, since you're on the screen now, happy to have you go first if you'd like.
Well, I guess my first thought is one that will outrage, I hope, half your audience, so that, and I might win the other half, which is I think the current president, is pretty good at this. Now, half of the audience is throwing their socks at the screen right now, and the other is saying yes, yes. But look at some of the things that Trump has done. First of all, he's very direct, but also, there are a lot of people who don't like the angry tone and the aggressive tone. But at the same time, that tone is communicating to a number of people what they feel. There was a tremendous feeling in the Republican Party of abandonment by large groups of Republicans. And he addressed that not just in his words, but in his tone. And that was part of pulling in that when we hear about Trump Republicans who are really Democrats who had come over, they were angry about a whole group of leadership in their old party and in the new party that they felt had abandoned them. And he spoke to that. And so, what I would say to you is that I don't know what the country's going to be like in 50 years and where the anger is going to be. But one way or another, you need to be able to absorb that and then turn it to a constructive end. And as well as other parts of the country, of the population. And that is the task of someone in that position to find it isn't some people say, oh, that's awful, that's whatever. What they're really saying is they don't agree with me and I'm better than they are. And that's what got through as well. That's what got through to an awful lot of people in the period that led up to led up to Trump. The people who were up there don't really trust me. They don't care about me, and they'll pull something on me. And he spoke to that, and the next one in 50 years will too.
Hans, what would you like to say in response to this question?
Is it like how to restore trust over a 20, 25-year horizon, if I understood the question correctly?
Yes, exactly. And what in particular should we hope to see from presidential communication? And what will be required? What should we hope to see to sustain or
Yeah.
rebuild that trust?
I suspect the trust is going to go downhill. It's going to drain. There's going to be a big authenticity question with Sora and AI and everything that people can do with videos. So it will probably put more of a premium on face-to-face interactions. So maybe it'll be good for like retail politics, like New Hampshire, where people can actually see um, the candidates talking. But just I wouldn't even presume to think out 20, 25 years. Like I'm more focused on 2028 and 2023 and just how we verify what's real and what's not. And I mean, some of the videos are fun, some of them are silly, some of them are cute, but like, it's one thing to have the president of the United States insert himself into a Olympic final hockey game. If you guys saw that video, it's clever, it's fun, it's not basically harmless, right? Cancel me later. But it has a whole other implications when you have candidates saying things they didn't say that are cross purposes of their platforms, and I don't have an answer for that. So, and with that, I've got to go talk to members of Congress. So, thank you very much for having me, and I wish you guys all the best of luck for the rest of your seminar here. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you. And Craig, apologies. I think you were about
No,
to
that's
jump
all right.
in
That's all right.
and I
That's
cut
all
you
right.
off. So
No,
yeah.
I enjoyed hearing what Hans had to say. I would say that it's the basic question is about character. Trust comes from character. When Jay and Hamilton and Madison were writing the Federalist Papers, they hammered over and over again that the most important qualification for President of the United States was character. And the man they had in mind, I mean, they were writing it for George Washington. They wanted George Washington to be president. And if you look at it, your better presidents have been presidents who are more that history regards more favorably or more kindly are the presidents who do what they say. The presidents who get into trouble are the ones who go back on what they say. And what comes to mind, George Bush in I know you didn't write this speech, Clark. I know Peggy wrote it. Wrote the speech in New Orleans, his acceptance speech, where he said, "Read my lips, no new taxes." And that became a question of character because 2 years later, he mocked the American people jogging by them for the cameras, and he pointed to his hips and said, "Read my hips," which was a terrible, awful thing to say. He raised taxes and he lost to Clinton. Governor Kay Orr did the same thing in Nebraska. She pledged not to raise taxes, and then she got into office, she raised taxes, and she lost. Margaret Thatcher in her last term pledged not to raise taxes. She raised taxes, and that she got thrown out of office. So the future presidents are going to be judged the way past presidents have been judged, which is what kind of character they have and what kind of trust do they build with the people, and do they mean what they say and do they stick by it, or do they reverse course? So the other example I'll use, again, it's about George Bush, is what during the Gulf War. When Saddam first invaded Kuwait, the majority of the American people were against military action. But then, Bush said, okay, there's a line in the sand, there's a deadline. And, before he did it, the American people were opposed. And then he said it, and then the American people were in favor of it. And they said he was going to double troop strength. And first of all, American people were against it. And then he doubled troop strength, and they were in favor of it. And then it came the deadline for the Saddam getting out of Kuwait, and he didn't abide by it. So Bush invaded, and the American people were against the invasion. But after the invasion, they were for it. So I think that's a very good example of molding public opinion, and leadership, and doing what you mean to say. And I think the American people do appreciate presidents who do what they mean, and what they say.
Emily, we have 2 minutes left, and I want to make sure you get the last
Sorry
word.
about that.
No,
Sorry
you're
about
fine.
that.
Absolutely, please.
Well, so I guess I would start from sort of one, you asked what they should be doing, what kind of communication we should have to sustain trust. And I really want to think about what kind of communication can we have that builds trust, right? We know if we look at public opinion polls that trust in all areas of government is at an all-time low since we've started asking these questions. And I'm going to think more sort of idealistically than maybe what I think will happen, especially given the technological picture that Hans painted with sort of the AI generated images and things like that. But I think one thing that would be wonderful to see is a sort of reversion to a more depersonalized presidency, right? That if we can increase trust in the institution of the presidency rather than trust in a particular president, that could go a long way towards sort of potential renewal of institutions. And so thinking about the ways in which, I think a lot of the elements that Clark and Craig and others have mentioned, things like transparency and authenticity, are effective ways for the president to communicate and could be used in a way that is building bridges, is restoring trust in the institution rather than denigrating it and other areas of government. So I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Absolutely. No, that was perfect. And thank you all so much. I hope Everyone still online with us will join me in a virtual round of applause in thanking our panelists. Thank you all for joining us very much, and look forward to continuing the conversation with our future panels and discussions, and looking forward to the anniversary on July 4th. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jeff, very much. Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.